In the Star Wars galaxy, there have been many weapons used to destroy their enemies, but very few stand out like the Death Star. This super weapon had the ability to destroy entire planets with a single shot, and ironically was destroyed by a single shot. But the fate of the Death Star, along with the Rebel Alliance, would have been changed if it wasn't for the man who fired the laser, or more accurately, who hesitated when firing it. The person who was responsible for firing the Death Star laser was a man called Ten Granite. He was also responsible for saving the Rebel Alliance when he hesitated to fire the laser on Yavin. Born around 50 BBY, Ten joined the Galactic Judicial Starfleet in 30 BBY, where he discovered his love of fighting and big weapons, or more specifically, firing them. From then on, he made it his life mission to fire the biggest weapon of all time. And when the time of the Clone Wars rolled around, he saw this as his perfect opportunity to rise to the position he so desperately desired. And when the Republic was replaced by the Empire, it didn't bother him at all. But something that did bother him for the rest of his life would be the death of his nephew, who joined the Imperial Navy out of admiration of him, but unfortunately was killed aboard a Star Destroyer, a death in which Granite felt very personally responsible for. Cut to 3 BBY, Granite has rose the ranks to Master Chief Petty Officer, and was currently stationed on the Imperial vessel called the Star Destroyer Steel Talon. But when he was working on it, he learned of the construction of the Death Star, and he saw this as his perfect opportunity, and asked his executive officer to be transferred there, and to his luck, he was transferred over there along with several other hand-picked high-ranking officers. And on top of being transferred over to the Death Star, he got the most important role of firing the laser. At first, this exhilarated him. His dreams of firing the biggest weapon in galactic history were finally coming to fruition. But the more and more he got familiar with the weapon, the more he grew horrified of the power that it could do. But because of his seemingly undying loyalty to the Empire, he convinced himself that it would never be used on a populated planet, but instead would be used to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. He convinced himself that the weapon would only be used in the correct ways because he believed that the Empire was a force of good. His opinions, though, would start to change when he first fired his weapon in the Lucrehall battleship that previously belonged to the now dismembered Separatists, but some rebels had gotten control over it. Seeing this as the perfect opportunity to test the weapon, they fired the laser at the ship at 4% power. But despite being at only 4% power, the ship was completely destroyed with nothing remaining of it. This would start to grow the seeds in his mind that maybe the weapon was being used for the wrong reason. His second time firing the laser would be at the planet of Despire, which was mostly home to pirates and smugglers, but also housed the Empire's slave forces that were used to construct the Death Star. And just like the time before, Granite fired the laser, but this time it took 3 shots to destroy the planet completely. The first laser killed every living thing on the planet. The second fire cracked the planet's crust, and the third and final shot destroyed the planet. And the time that it took to recharge the laser was hours. And during this time, as well as afterwards, Granite grew to be very depressed about what he has done. And then came the fateful day of destroying Alderaan. This was the first time that the Death Star was fired at 100%, and it completely destroyed the planet in a single shot, even with the planetary shields on. At first, Granite believed that the Alderaan had no life on it, was only being used to demonstrate its power. But when he found out that he was the one that fired the laser that killed over 2 billion people, he completely broke down and couldn't believe what he had just done. He later named himself the largest mass murderer in the galaxy. Shortly after the destruction of Alderaan, the crew on the Death Star learned of what he did, and they started to treat him differently, as he was the one that fired the shot that killed over 2 billion people. He might have had his thoughts and feelings about the Empire, but this was the first time he truly began to question what they stood for. He even began to hate the people on top who put him in this terrible position that forced him to commit planetary genocide. This questioning later turned into a deep fear and paranoia that if the Rebel Alliance were to win against the Empire, he'd be the first to be executed. As he thought more and more on this, he thought about leaving the Empire, but then realized that someone else would be forced to take his position, and would be forced to deal with the guilt of firing a laser that could destroy all life. And then the time came to blow up the Rebel base in the Battle of Yavin. As the battle raged on, he prayed and looked for any way where he would not have to pull down the lever to fire the laser. So he started to stall by repeating stand by and hold on to his crew, to buy as much time as possible, even if it was just a few seconds. But in those few seconds, the new Rebel hotshot Luke Skywalker had just fired the Torpon torpedoes into the exhaust port, and caused a chain reaction that blew up the Death Star. This would cause the death of Ten Granite alongside everyone else on the battle station. While he may not have lived to see it, Ten Granite is the reason the rebels were able to continue on fighting and eventually defeat the Empire. And that, my friends, is the story of the Imperial officer who fired the Death Star laser. What are your thoughts on this? Did he deserve this kind of fate? Let me know. Make sure you like and subscribe, and with that, my fellow Star Wars nerds, may the Force be with you.